Hello and welcome. I'm continuing my objective of going through all of the colors in my cube and just breaking down the archetypes. Today we're going to be doing the green archetypes. I've already done red and like an intro to my cube, so if you want to see those first, link in the description. All of these videos have an accompanying article, so I'm not going to like read the article verbatim, but this will like expound upon what the article says. So if you want to read it alongside the video or afterwards or before, it's on my website. You can just go to like calebgannon.com, click on MTG, find the articles. Green is one of the more interesting colors in my cube. It actually has the fewest number of like specific archetypes, but it makes up for that by just being very supportive towards other archetypes. And the archetypes it does have are very general too. So it's a very fun color. The biggest difference between green in my cube and what you might expect in a different cube is green is not ramp. Rather than going for, ramping into fatties and like big stuff, this plays out more akin to like a combo deck, which, you could go like storm combo or like elf combo, but it's a lot different than just casting like a 5-drop as your objective. The objective is to get a lot of creatures into play and use those creatures as combo pieces, either for mana, for cards, damage, all of the above. So it's just a different play style. If you've played any type of Elves deck, you'll be familiar with it, but we'll just go through them. The first is Glimpse of Nature combo. So this is more of the combo-oriented side. There's 3 different cards in the cube that say, effectively, whenever you play a creature spell this turn, draw a card. Glimpse of Nature is the most famous, and this artwork is fantastic, by the way. So that one's the one you should look for first. There's also Rite of Harmony, which says whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield, draw a card. And then back, it's sideways, but it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield this turn, you may draw a card. So there are actually 3 different ones. Beck is a may ability, Rite of Harmony is a must, and Glimpse is on cast. So this one does not work on tokens. Rite of Harmony and Beck do. And then Beck being a may ability means you're less likely to deck yourself, whereas you can, draw out of your deck if you're going off too hard with Glimpse of Nature or Rite of Harmony. In particular, Rite of Harmony into like Chatterstorm or Empty the Warrens can easily make you draw your entire deck. So be a little bit careful about that. So that's the basis of this combo, is you have like this card draw engine. And to combo with that, you're going to want to play small creatures, like a bunch of like Llanowar Elves, or reuse Enter the Battlefield ability. So there's a full elf combo in green in my cube. So you can run like Wirewood Symbiote, which lets you return elves to your hand and then untap creatures, which is really good with something like Elvish Visionary. So this, when it enters, draw a card. And then you can just keep returning it to hand every turn and drawing quite a few cards. And if you combine that with a card like Priest of Titania, who taps to add green for each elf on the battlefield, suddenly you're drawing a bunch of cards, adding a bunch of mana, digging through your deck. And if you combine that with like an active Glimpse of Nature, things get out of hand. So I would consider that option like the fair version of the deck, which is like Glimpse of Nature, Rite of Harmony, play creatures normally, and then draw like a non-infinite amount of cards off the Glimpse of effects, until you run out of creatures in your deck or you stop drawing them. The ways to go infinite is by pairing these Glimpse effects with these creatures that enter and then return themselves to your hand. Shrieking Drake is probably the best out of all of them. Whenever it comes into play, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. You can return itself. So you play Shrieking Drake, draw a card, return it to your hand. Play Shrieking Drake, draw a card, return it to your hand. And, you can just draw your whole deck, generate infinite storm. The key is mana. Like you need, essentially infinite mana if you want to generate infinite storm with this. So there's 3 major mana engines that you can look for, but there's more that you can make work. The best and most obvious is probably Allurin. So it just lets any player cast creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less without paying the mana cost and with flash. So with Allurin, you could just play Shrieking Drake infinite times without spending any mana. Infinite Storm, Brain Freeze your opponent out. Glimpse of Nature, draw your whole deck until you get to like Thassa's Oracle and win that way. So this one's fairly straightforward. Just the thing to look for is the ability is symmetric. So if you play this and don't go off, your opponent can take advantage of the ability too, which will be more or less relevant depending on the matchup. Earthcraft is next. I think this is probably the strongest out of all of them, but it does require running basic lands. So yeah, keep in mind it is basic land. I see people mess that up a lot, so just keep that in mind with your deck building. Tap and untap creature you control, untap target basic land. So this works through Summoning Sickness. So if you play Shrieking Drake, you can tap it in response to its trigger to untap an island, and then return it to hand. So you can like play it, untap a blue, return to hand, use that blue to cast it, and with that you can loop the card infinitely. It's a bit more complicated for like the core Skyfish and White Mane line, but there are ways to set it up to go infinite with Earthcraft as well. Like Helm of Awakening, things that make them cheaper, stuff like that. So this one's insane. It's also good in a variety of other decks. Like you're not just going to be playing this in Glimpse of Nature. You can play it in like tokens deck, like Empty the Warrens. With this is very good. Black Sacrifice decks, you know, there's like so many different things you can do with Earthcraft and Alurin, to be honest. Like there's so many different things. The intended purpose is for this like Alurin, Glimpse of Nature type deck, but I've played Earthcraft in a lot of crazy decks. It's a very strong card. And yeah, I would not be surprised if there's like so many different archetypes that this deck is good in. So try this card out. It's sweet. Just remember basic lands. The last one is Intruder Alarm. Whenever any creature comes into play, untap all creatures. So this is very good if you have like mana elves, like, you know, Birchlore Rangers, Heritage Druid, Birds of Paradise, things like that. Suddenly, anytime you play a creature, all your mana creatures untap. It's particularly good with Earthcraft because all of your creatures can tap for mana. So like whenever a creature comes into play, you untap a basic land like 10 times and get crazy amounts of mana. You can imagine like Earthcraft, Intruder Alarm, Empty the Warrens, for example. Every single creature from the Empty the Warrens trigger will give you the ability to untap all of your creatures. So like the first Empty the Warrens will resolve. You'll be able to tap both of those two for mana twice. And then the second one will resolve, you'll be able to tap all 4 creatures twice. And then the third one will resolve, you'll be able to tap all 6 creatures twice. And it's just like an insane amount of mana. So Intruder Alarm goes deep. There's also some combos with it, like Emery. She taps to cast artifacts from your graveyard. So if you cast an artifact creature, she will untap. And then if you can like sacrifice that, so then you can recast it. That's another way to get infinite untap ability. So this one's really good. I think it's one of the more underrated ones. It goes the biggest out of all of these because you untap all of your creatures. So like if you have Birchlore Rangers with a ton of elves and you're casting more elves, you don't just get like 1 mana, you get 5, 10, 15. If you have where is it? Priest of Titania, you could get like 50 mana and it just goes big. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, so then mentioning mana, there are these which act kind of like Earthcraft. Heritage Druid in particular is very strong if you have a lot of elves, and there is a lot of elf support in this cube. So if you can play this early, it just gives all your elves essentially the ability to tap for mana. You just have to do it in pairs of 3. Birchlore Rangers taps 2 elves to give mana of any color. So these two, if you don't happen to run Earthcraft or Intruder Alarm, they can help you go very quickly. And they're good combos with cards like Nettle Sentinel, which whenever you cast a green spell, it untaps. So if you pair that with the Birchlore Rangers, now basically every single green creature that comes into play, you can cast for a little bit. If you get a Paradise Mantle, which gives the equipped creature the ability to tap for mana, put that on a Nettle Sentinel, you know, suddenly you're going off. So that's another way. And then there's the big mana generation cards. Circle of Dream Druid, Priest of Titania, Elvish Archdruid, Gaia's Cradle. These really help you go from, I guess, kind of like treading water to ending the game. Gaia's Cradle tapping for 10 mana, casting a Crater Hoof is game-ending card. And especially with like Priest of Titania and Circle of Dreams Druid, getting the untap effects like Quirion Ranger and Wirewood Symbiote can help you really bridge that gap between putting creatures into play and then trying to end the game. Because getting 10 mana once, you know, maybe you use that to cast creatures off Glimpse to draw your deck. You draw into Wirewood Symbiote, you get to like return Elvish Visionary, untap Priest of Titania, add 15 mana this time, draw a bunch of cards, and kind of end the game. So I would take these untapped creatures fairly highly. The only thing worth noting is Wirewood Symbiote is not an elf, so you can run into weird situations where like you attack with it and you think it's an elf because there's cards that care about elves. So just look out for that. So yeah, the deck basically puts small creatures in play, draw a bunch of cards, add a bunch of mana. To win, there's a lot of different ways you can go. There is Craterhoof Behemoth, which is the most obvious, but honestly not necessarily the best. Allosaurus Shepherd and Mirror Entity, I think, have my vote for the two strongest. Mirror Entity in particular is just insane. So it's an elf, first of all, it's a changeling, so it triggers for all of your elf things. But then if you get like 10 mana, you can just turn all of your team into 10/10s. That's fairly game ending. So I would definitely look for him. The important thing to note for cards like him is if you're not ending the game the turn he comes down, you really want to save mana up to protect your team, because he dies to like shock, lightning bolt, things like that. But if you have like a Wirewood Symbiote in play, he can return an elf to its owner's hand. So you can have Wirewood Symbiote Mirror Entity in play, and then if your opponent tries to kill Mirror Entity, first of all, you can bounce it with the Wirewood Symbiote's ability so that, you know, it fizzles the removal. But you can also do something like untap Priest of Titania and then grow your team in response to the ability. So if you're not ending the game the turn that Mirror Entity, Allosaur, Shepherd, Elvish Warmaster come into play, it's really important to protect them so that you can end the game the following turn when all of your team has haste or whatever. So that's an important thing to look for. The win conditions, they exist. You will find them, but you may need to be a little bit cautious or protective of like when you use them. Allosaur Shepherd is quite good as well. For 6 mana, turns all of your elves into 5/5 dinosaurs. So you just play it, you win. It makes it can't be countered, and green spells you control can't be countered. So it's a good anti-control card, and it's an insane win condition. It's a 1 mana elf. This card's very strong. Elvish Warmaster is probably the weakest out of all of them, but it does give you a bunch of 1/1 elves, so it's good with like Skull Clamp, and it grows your team very quickly. And then the ability to pump your team, it seems like it wouldn't be that great, but honestly, you flood the board so quickly that activating this once can just easily make you swing for lethal. And I've activated this like 15 times, I think, in one game. I had a non-infinite amount of mana, but it was like 600 or something. So you can definitely grow just a few creatures to lethal if you have the mana for it. Finale of Devastation is another fantastic card to have. It is a win condition. Just make sure you treat this card like it is a win condition, because you can cast it for 10, and then your team gets +X/+X and haste. Swinging with 10/10 haste creatures seems pretty good to me. So those are the main win conditions. If you're going for the more fair decks, if you're going for the combo-oriented decks, with like Allurin or Earthcraft, drawing your deck and just playing Thassa's Oracle off Allurin is a very easy way to win the game. So I would look for that. But you get Infinite Storm, right? So you could just play like Brain Freeze, Aetherflux Reservoir, Tendrils of Agony. Like there's a bunch of different ways to win the game when you have the ability to draw your entire deck. So there's a fair deck that wants to just beat down with creatures that may or may not run Glimpse of Nature. You could just run full Elves Mirror Entity and be super aggressive. Then there's this unfair deck that kind of, goes for combos, Earthcraft, draw your deck in one turn, and you can pretty much slot any win condition in that deck you want. Banefire works pretty well too. So that's one. You could put creature combos into there, like Altar of Dementia, plus some of these pump spells is a way to sneak game wins as well. Walking Ballista or Blood Artist too can work. So that's the thing. There's a couple miscellaneous cards that you might not think would be good in your deck, but that is. Paradoxical Outcome is one that's very strong, because you bounce all your elves to hand and you draw a bunch of cards. And in particular, because you're trying to draw cards off Glimpse of Nature, which triggers when a creature enters the battlefield, if you can play all of your creatures, draw off Glimpse when they come down, then return them to hand and draw off them coming back to hand, and then play them again and draw off them coming into play, that's like an insane amount of card draw that you just got access to. And if you combine this with something like Eternal Witness, you can bounce the Eternal Witness and then play Eternal Witness, get back the outcome, play the outcome, get back Eternal Witness, and that's like a really good way for an Elves deck to bridge the gap between early game and late game, where you just have this like very strong card draw engine that will deck you very quickly. So look for this one. That one's great. The other one is something that I mentioned. Rite of Harmony and Beck don't care whether it's a token or non-token creature. So you can combine them with token creators like Empty, Torrens, Genesis Chamber. And this works well in like the token storm decks with like Earthcraft. And you can even transition into more of a sacrifice themed deck as well with this many tokens, right? Genesis Chamber creates a ton of tokens. Empty the Warrens, Earthcraft, Beck. It is a lot of colors, but it's a strong play to make for sure. So look for that. And then I somewhat alluded to this, but there's a bunch of different ways to build these type of decks. One is playing the elf creatures kind of straight up with Allurin. There's also like a graveyard version of this deck to generate mana where with like Phyrexian Altar and Pitiless Plunderer, suddenly every creature you can sacrifice for 2 mana. If you combine that with Fecundity, whenever a creature dies, they can draw a card. Suddenly you're sacrificing all of your creatures for a card and 2 mana of any color. If you have Midnight Reaper with that, suddenly you're going off, and Blood Artist you can throw in there to win the game. So there's like a graveyard themed version of this deck too. For instance, like Gravecrawler, it works with Allurin, it works with Earthcraft because it can pay for itself. So you can loop that. It works with Phyrexian Altar as well. You can sacrifice it. So there's a whole lot of things here where, yes, there's like this green creature deck, but the beautiful thing is it slots into a bunch of different stuff. Like you could go green, black, zombie elves or something like that, and have this Gravecrawler sacrifice package, have elves, and then you like sacrifice your whole team with the Fecundity Midnight Reaper in play to draw your deck. And then, Second Sunrise or Rally the Ancestors if you have the mana for it to bring your whole team back and swing for lethal. The thing I want to make sure that is clear is this is a bunch of different possibilities. It's very difficult to do all of this in one deck. But I'm just showcasing these as like different options you can do, right? You can go green-black sacrifice. You can go black-white sacrifice. If you get the mana for it, you can go Abzan sacrifice and try and do everything. But try and pick a clear, focused objective for your deck, rather than just being like, Caleb said Gravecrawler is good in Glimpse of Nature. Like, don't run Gravecrawler in a green Elves deck just on its own. Like, if your deck is lending more towards like Nether Trader, Gravecrawler, Fecundity, Midnight Reaper, Blood Artist, and then you happen to get, some Birds of Paradise, some Elvish Visionaries, Gaia's Cradles, I think that's fine. Just don't put these cards, like, when I first came up with this article, I got a bunch of people putting Second Sunrise in just a straight up green Elves deck with no sacrifice outlets. Don't do that. You need the sacrifice outlet for this card to do its thing. So that's my 2 cents. And then, yeah, there's, like I said, the bounds in this is kind of limitless. So you could do an artifact-based deck. Remember, Beck doesn't care whether it's a creature being cast or a token entering. So if you have Beck with Psy, Ornithopter, Tolarian Academy, and like Intruder Alarm, and maybe Urza. Urza acts like Earthcraft. Beck draws you cards. Psy creates tokens, so you're drawing a ton of cards. Glimpse of Nature, Ornithopter, Memnite, Hangerback Walker, things like that is all very good. Remember we talked about Emery Intruder Alarm, so Gaia's Cradle, even with Psy and things like that, works. Paradoxical Outcome is good in this deck too, so just be open to other types of decks. You can go, Glimpse combo in an artifact deck if you're feeling it. And then in my paper cube, I'm running Ineffable Blessing. Mostly this is just worth mentioning because it's a silver bordered card and everyone thinks these are memes, but if you name 2, this says whenever a creature with exactly number of words enters, you draw a card. Most creatures in the cube have 2 words in their name, like almost all of them. So this just becomes like a 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature enters, draw a card, and it's very good. Okay, so now we're on to Elves, and I really kind of already talked about this above in the video, but Elves is kind of just what I'm calling the less all-in combo variation of the deck, where instead of trying to like Glimpse of Nature your whole deck, you're just trying to play creatures and beat down. So in this type of deck, win conditions are a lot more important because you're not really going to be brain freezing someone if you're just playing a bunch of Elves. So this is where you really want to focus on the Mirror Entity, Allosaurus Shepherd, Elvish Warmaster type deck. Elvish Archdruid is fantastic. You could just start beating down. Like, it seems like a joke, but you can play Elves so quickly, and giving them +1/+1 is really strong. And just swinging with your team, like, you can kill them very quickly. If you don't, you're going to untap with a ton of mana. And like at that point, you just deploy a Mirror Entity and win that way. So this deck is typically trying to be as fast as possible. And that's one way to go with it. If you're not all in on the Elf synergies specifically, you're going to be a bit more chunky. In that case, you're trying to aim for turn 1 mana accelerant into like turn 2 3-drop. So like Tauren's Fist of the Angels is like the perfect quintessential card for this, where he just grows an army very quickly. You start swinging, you kill your opponent fast. Luminarch Aspirant, also really strong. Fiend Artisan can help you lean more into like creature combos. Because essentially the thing that I mentioned before is the green decks are very good at supporting. There are so many elf creatures or like 1 mana green accelerants that you can just, if you're taking elves and it's cut, you can transition into like a persist combo deck, an aggressive deck, even like a tempo or controlling deck like Pest Infestation is just a very strong card. However strong you think this card is, it's just better. Like it makes tokens, it kills so many artifacts and enchantments. It's very good. Masked Vandal is phenomenal. It's 2 mana, it exiles the targets. It's an elf, it's a zombie, like it does a lot of stuff. And then obviously you're going to want removal in those decks too. So you can move into more of like a creature-based mid-range deck. There's another one, a really good graveyard-based deck with Survival of the Fittest. I talked about this a bit in the red archetype video, so you can go check that out or read the article. But yeah, you have all these elves, so you have things to discard. Anger is really fun in elves. It gives everything haste. So you survival for anger, then you maybe get Vengevine, start playing elves, start attacking very quickly. Maybe slot some Brute Walls into there, and now you have this awesome like green-red elves aggro deck. That's a very fun one. And then you can also lean into like Flicker or value stuff, especially if you have Allurin or things like that, where Eternal Witness is pretty good with Allurin. Ephemerate Eternal Witness is great late game win condition. And then there's just a lot of creatures that draw cards when they enter. Collected Company in particular is great. The curve, again, you're trying to look for is 1 mana accelerant into 3 drops. So Collected Company fits really well with that because you're going to have all these 3 drops that you want to hit. I would kind of advise against playing Collected Company in a deck that has mostly 1-drops, just because you're not getting that much value, right? The dream is you cast Collected Company and you get 2 1-mana plays. You spent 4 mana for 2 mana worth of cards. That's not great. Whereas if you Collected Company into 2 3-drops, you spent 4 mana for 6 mana worth of cards, and that's like a very big tempo boost. All right, next let's talk about lands. Lands is a very fun archetype. It is similar to things people have seen in other cubes, so it's not it doesn't need that much discussion, but yeah, it's as close to a ramp deck as there exists in the format. Right now there's 3 major accelerants: Exploration, Fast Bond, Dry into the Elysian Grove. Of all these, obviously Fast Bond is the strongest, but Exploration does have a use if you're not trying to combo because you don't take extra damage. And that adds up, right? If you Exploration 3 times, that's 3 extra life you would have, rather than if you had done it with Fast Bond. So don't count out Exploration. I think this card is insanely strong, and I would take it roughly as high as I would take Fast Bond, but obviously Fast Bond is better. Dryad has some extra utilities, but it's a 2/4, which is really big in this cube, and it turns all of your lands into lands of any type, so it really helps with like the 5-color lands deck. And of all the decks, I think lands leans itself best into going 5 colors, because the main thing you want in the lands deck is fetch lands. So you're going to be taking all these non-basic lands, and just by virtue of that, you're going to get good fixing. So lands actually plays out a lot like a control deck in this format most of the time. You can go in like straight red-green combos or whatever, but for the most part, I think lands is the strongest when you're taking a bunch of like removal spells with all the fixing that you have, and you use the lands package as this inevitability, right? You have Life from the Loam, Living Twister, Strip Mine with a Fast Bond. Like, eventually you're going to kill all of your opponent's lands, kill all of their creatures with the Living Twister. Like, you will win the late game. So the key part with lands, for the most part, there's other ways to build it, is to play like a control deck. There are other ways. So here's some fun directions to go. These cards brought back Second Sunrise and Face Reward. They work on lands. They work in any permanent type. So if you're playing a lot of fetch lands and you play brought back targeting 2 fetch lands, suddenly you've ramped yourself by 2. Second Sunrise, if you have like a Zurin Orb or fetch lands or things like that, crop rotation, suddenly, this is a good way to accelerate out your game plan. Like if you just go turn 1 fetch, turn 2 fetch, turn 3 fetch, you crack all of them, cast Second Sunrise, you're up to 6 lands. So I would look for these in a lands deck if you don't have Exploration or Fast Bond, or in addition. They just give you a good way to ramp. They act as win conditions, which I'll talk about later. When you have all these cards, obviously you're going to want Ramanov, Crucible of Worlds, just to be able to replay them. Life from the Loam works too, and Slogurk the Overslime is one I'm very fond of. This card, it just gets back lands. It grows very quickly. Like, this is a decent win condition for the lands deck, but then it also, you could just, use it to get back your lands. I don't know, it's a fun card. I also have played it in some Blink archetypes, like this card with Restoration Angel can be really strong because it just says when it leaves, you're going to get the lands. You don't have to make it leave the battlefield from its ability. Fetch lands, these are the things you want. Take these very highly, especially with Ramanop Crucible. Second Sunrise brought back, like they're just good with everything. So take fetch lands very highly. The key is to just make sure you have enough fetchable duels. I've seen people run up like, 12 fetch lands and 3, non-basic, non-fetch lands, and that's just not enough. Strip Mine, Wasteland are insane. Boseiju is really good too. Dealing with non-basic lands is strong, and then artifacts or enchantments are like the blood of this key, basically. So being able to disrupt your opponent with something that is recursive like a land, I think is great. Artifact mana can get in the midst of this. Like if you're trying to strip mine your opponent out, they have Mark Sapphire, that can become a problem. So cards like Ratchet Bomb and Engineered Explosives really help with that. Ratchet Bomb in particular kills tokens, kills Moxen. Like these cards are way better than it looks. Same with Engineered Explosives, I think looks that good, but it's a strong magic card. And then lands has some of the strongest late game cards. Field of the Dead is one of the biggest reasons. This is why I talked about the inevitability of the deck. You play lands and you eventually grow an army. So Field of the Dead is what I would take the most highly, or the most generally. I think Titania is the strongest card in the cube. Like the single card with the highest ceiling is Titania, because she just ends the game the turn she comes down if you build your deck around her. Because basically with her, you just want to sacrifice all of your lands and just create this huge army of 5/3 elementals. Something like Squandered Resources lets you sacrifice lands to add mana. So if you do that with Titania out, suddenly you have like 5/3 elementals, and that's so much damage. Squandered Resources also works well with Gitrog Monster. He just lets you draw a ton of cards. Notice it's whenever they enter your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So he pairs well with things like Molten Vortex or Living Twister, because you can discard lands to do damage to your opponent and you draw a card every time you do it. So Gitrog Monster is really good. He's good with Squandered Resources too. You can build like a Gitrog Storm type list where you sacrifice all of your lands with Gitrog in play, draw a bunch of cards, then you cast Second Sunrise, return them all back to play. It's a lot of fun stuff there. You can't even do a trick, which is the thing that the Valakut decks in like Modern take advantage of, where with Valakut or Field of the Dead, the criteria can be met if all of the lands enter the battlefield at the same time. So if you have 7 or more lands with different names and you sacrifice all of them and then you bring them back with Second Sunrise, they'll all see each other. And so you'll be able to trigger all of the abilities for each one. So you'll get 14 zombies, or you'll get 7 zombies for doing that. And if you have Gitrog in play, you will get 7 zombies, draw 7 cards, and generate a bunch of mana. Like it's a strong sequence. You have Titania in play. When you do that, suddenly you have like 100 power. So that's a thing. Oh yeah, the land deck also slots pretty well into the sacrifice theme, because a lot of the sacrifice cards care about sacrificing permanents. So Corvold is just an amazing magic card. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a counter on Corvold and draw a card. So if you pair Corvold with something like Squandered Resources, or even just fetch lands, crack a fetch with Corvold in play, you get to draw a card and grow him. Like that's really strong. Same with Mayhem Devil. Mayhem Devil plus the ability to sacrifice lands can go deep. So be open to land-based sacrifice decks. And yeah, there's a bunch of ways to generate mana, so you can with Banefire. But the lands deck, it has the biggest creatures in the cube. So I think winning the game isn't too much of a concern. Just be sure you be sure you plan for a win condition at some point. Field of the Dead is an excellent one. Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is also in there, but I did talk about that in my article about the red archetypes. There are some combos. Zurin Orb is like the premier land sacrifice outlet. Zurin Orb, Fastbond Crucible is the backbone of like a bajillion different combos. You get infinite mana, infinite life. You can strip mine your opponent infinitely. Like there's a bunch of different stuff. Worth noting, if you have Fastbond Crucible Courser, you can strip mine your own lands and then replay the land to get mana. So if you don't have a way to sacrifice the lands directly, you can kill your own lands to generate mana that way. And this is what I was talking about before, but Squandered Resources, Zurin Orb with Second Sunrise, sacrifice your whole board, bring them all back. If you have Gitrog Monster, Corvold, a bunch of different things, even just if you don't have any of those, this can generate like an insane amount of mana, win with Banefire or whatever you want to do. There is Grove of the Burnwillow's Punishing Fire in this cube, so look out for that. The combo is this gains your opponent life, and whenever your opponent gains life, you can pay red to return Punishing Fire to hand. So this is kind of why the lands deck slots well into control, but you can put this in any deck, right? You could even be like blue-red Storm and splash Grove of the Burnwillow's Punishing Fire. It's just a strong combo. So yeah, that's mostly what green does. Largely, green is a color of support for other things, but the mono green deck lists, or the green centered deck lists of lands, elves, and then a Lurin combo are the major ones to be looking for. But just be open, like mana dorks are so good that, you know, they're basically like Moxen, and fetch lands are good. So green is an excellent color for enabling other archetypes. So if you're in green, you're drafting one of these mono green archetypes and you start getting cut, don't worry, there's a lot of easy pivots you can do into like green-black sacrifice, land sacrifice, lands control. You know, there's so much stuff. So yeah, that's green. Next, I'm going to talk about, I guess, white archetypes, because that's right here. If you guys are enjoying this, please let me know, and I'll see you then. If you made it this far into the video, you're clearly enjoying the content. So if you want to help support me being able to make more content, there's two ways to do it. The first is free and very easy. Just following me on Instagram. You get, you know, to see cool stuff like this cat made out of trees or this dog that's an island. Some very interesting or trippy videos like this one, which it's not for everybody. The other one is just going to my store. I sell art like the ones I've shown. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. You can shop the collections and see things like this. I'm selling t-shirts. And I would really appreciate it. Thank you.